南斯拉夫解體之後，喺各個獨立共和國之間，戰事馬上就發生啦。其中最慘無人道嘅就係塞爾維亞人對波斯尼亞人嘅欺凌同埋殺戮。波斯尼亞男人當時咧係集體被屠殺，而女人呢就俾塞爾維亞人咧集體強姦，甚至咧強迫佢哋生仔。人類發展到20世紀90年代，竟然仲有呢啲慘絕人寰嘅事情呢，實在係不可思議嘅。教宗作為9億天主教教徒嘅領袖，當然十分之關心。教廷關心人民嘅尊嚴，維護佢哋嘅權利，係一種人道主義干預，亦都係教會嘅道德義務。波斯尼亞嘅首府係薩拉熱窩，本來係一個好美麗嘅山城。過去呢4個大宗教都係和平共處，但係今日可以講話係生靈塗炭。大家喺片裏邊可以睇到，教宗喺意大利亞西西呢一個地方呢，主辦咗一個祈禱大會，佢召集咗天主教、基督教、回教同埋猶太教嘅教徒參加，希望大家一齊努力消滅南斯拉夫呢一場可怕嘅悲劇。蘇聯社會主義陣營崩潰咗之後，東歐國家紛紛獨立，呢啲包括原來屬於南斯拉夫嘅斯洛文尼亞同埋克羅地亞，佢哋都同梵蒂岡建交。而喺呢一年裏邊呢，同梵蒂岡建交嘅國家呢，甚至包括呢蒙古同埋墨西哥。喺呢一年，教宗亦都訪問咗非洲，特別係嗰啲最窮同埋飽受內戰打擊嘅國家，比如安哥拉。安哥拉喺1975年葡萄牙人走咗之後呢，一直喺度打，互相殘殺，直到本世紀初呢先至結束內戰。呢一場內戰呢係打咗20幾年。教宗特別到過安哥拉，亦都去過呢就係黑奴嘅集中地同埋上船嘅地方呢憑吊。佢對非洲嘅苦難呢感到十分之難過，希望非洲呢能夠有一個深刻嘅政治同埋經濟改革。教宗亦都去到聖多明哥慶祝哥倫布發現新大陸500週年。呢一個亦都表示就係佢要慶祝美洲嘅福音傳播係開始咗500週年。趁呢一個機會咧，教廷咧亦都新編咗呢個天主教嘅教理。喺典習嘅最後一個部分咧，大家可以睇到喺梵蒂岡嘅一個大廳裏邊舉行嘅會議。教宗喺會議上邊正式宣布，研究伽利略案委員會嘅結論就係話天主教會當時的確係犯咗錯誤。教宗勇於承擔，無形中咧亦都係增強咗天主教會嘅威信。
500 years after Columbus' discovery, this year was to have been dedicated to the evangelization of America. Instead, it was the terrifying massacres of the cruel war in Yugoslavia that the Pope referred to most frequently. It was supposed to be the year America was rediscovered. Instead, it became the year of humanitarian interference. It was the Pope and his Secretary of State who invented this phrase, a bold, apparently paradoxical expression for the Holy Father and the Vatican's diplomats to use. However, every time that the Holy See defends the rights of a people or citizens whose dignity and safety are attacked or violated, it is humanitarian interference. The phrase was coined to express just how involved the Pope felt, emotionally too, in the inhuman actions that took place first in Croatia and later in Bosnia, with Sarajevo in the front line, a city that had been under siege and mercilessly bombed since April and was to remain so for more than 1,000 days, about 3 years in total. Prior to this, the Bosnian capital had been a symbol of the peaceful coexistence of 4 religious creeds, with minarets standing beside the bell towers of Catholic churches and synagogues standing alongside Orthodox churches. In the Pope's desperate appeals for peace, Sarajevo became the symbol of ethnic war and endless pain. Humanitarian interference was the Vatican's way of justifying international intervention to disarm the Serbian aggressor who was guilty of horrendous crimes such as massacres carried out in the name of ethnic cleansing, provoking an exodus of refugees, the like of which had not been seen since the Second World War. The Pope's appeals fell on deaf ears. Unlike the situation in the Persian Gulf, where the West's oil supplies had been under threat, Europe and the USA remained unmoved. The concept of humanitarian interference became the symbol of people's right to food and survival. The Pope's diplomatic line was that international human rights should prevail over hypocritical non-intervention. Cardinal Sodano was the first to outline the idea of humanitarian interference as a right and duty on August the 7th. Confronted by the genocide taking place in Bosnia, he defined it as an ethical need. The idea was taken up again by the Pope at the FAO conference on nutrition in Rome on December 5th. The Pope also spoke of Somalia, another country in which millions of people were caught in the crossfire of famine and war. John Paul II showed how falling back on non-intervention was an arbitrary choice in cases such as these. His voice, broken with emotion, reached the Croat and Bosnian bunkers. His words were a ray of hope in the lives of so many people caught in the darkness of racial hatred, especially when he told them, "Remember, you are not on your own." In December, the Pope called for a day of prayer and fasting in Assisi on the 9th and 10th of January 1993. He summoned representatives from all the European bishoprics and warmly invited other Christian churches and communities in Europe to take part, along with Jews and Muslims. This was to show people decimated by ethnic strife and forced to abandon their villages that they really were not alone. It was a call for men of faith everywhere to work actively for peace in the name of their creed, whatever that might be. It was a call to end the enormous tragedy taking place in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which the Pope saw not as a regional problem, but as a European one. On the 13th January, the Holy See recognized the independent sovereign states of Slovenia and Croatia, 2 days before their recognition by the EU. At the same time, it sent a note to the Belgrade government stating that this move was not to be seen as a hostile act against Yugoslavia. Diplomatic ties were established on February the 9th, the same day ties were established with the Ukraine. Throughout the year, the Holy See worked hard to solve the crisis in ex-Yugoslavia diplomatically, even intervening in the Conference for European Security and calling the Croatian bishops to Rome. The Pope also sent a message to the Bosnian bishops, who could not come, and a meeting of the 11 papal nuncios from the Balkan area was also organized. With the fall of the Communist bloc and the disintegration of the USSR into a group of new independent republics, there was a race to establish diplomatic ties with the Holy See. The Pope's indispensable role in aiding their return to a democratic system of government was plain for all to see. In 1992, 15 states opened diplomatic relations with the Vatican, from Slovenia and Croatia to all the republics of the ex-USSR to Mongolia and Mexico, which that year rescinded a repressive Masonic and anti-Catholic constitution. At the end of July came the historic decision to set up a permanent bilateral working committee to normalize relations between Israel and the Holy See. One of the most important events of John Paul II's 14th year as Pope was his illness. On the 15th of July, he was admitted to the Gemelli Clinic to undergo surgery for the removal of a benign intestinal tumor. The Pope himself made the announcement of this, his third trip to hospital. The two previous occasions were after the attempted assassination of 1981, during his Angelus on Sunday, July the 12th. The news stunned his listeners, and people everywhere sent messages of affectionate support, mixed with a real sense of apprehension. The Pope told those present in St. Peter's Square that sunny morning that instead of his usual trip to the mountains, he was going to hospital.
Vorrei ora farvi una confidenza. Questa sera mi recherò al Policlinico Gemelli per sottopormi ad alcuni accertamenti diagnostici. Chiedo le vostre preghiere affinché il Signore mi sia accanto col suo aiuto e col suo sostegno. Alla Vergine Santissima ripeto il mio totus tuus con piena fiducia nella sua materna protezione.
The announcement, and the fact that it was left deliberately vague, hinted at a serious problem. There was worldwide affection and support for the ailing Pope, and people everywhere appreciated the way he had made the announcement himself, without hiding anything from the public. Carlo Bo wrote in the Corriere della Sera that through his simple words and his prayer to the Lord for help, the Pope had found the most convincing way to come closer to the people. The way he revealed his own worries about his health and faithfully placed himself in the hands of the Lord and the Blessed Virgin was a lesson in humility. The operation took place on the morning of the 15th and lasted nearly 4 hours. As the tumor was benign, it was a radical operation aimed at eliminating the illness completely. 5 days later, the world learnt about the true nature of the illness. The tumor had been removed before it could become malign. After 16 days, a much thinner and much paler John Paul II left the hospital for a period of convalescence at Castel Gandolfo and Lorenzago di Cadore, where he recovered completely. This was the year that the Pope of the Salvifici Doloris, which stressed the redeeming quality of human suffering united with that of Christ, declared February the 11th the World Day of the Ill. In the 4 months leading up to his stay in hospital, John Paul II went to Africa twice. This was a confirmation of the increasingly active and important role played by the continent in the Catholic world. In February, he visited some of the states along the Atlantic coast, Senegal, Gambia, and Guinea-Bissau, taking as his theme the dialogue between Christians and Muslims. In June, he visited Angola and São Tomé, where a horrific 16-year-long civil war had just ended. It had claimed 300,000 lives. His most impressive gesture during his first visit was the trip to the slave island of Gorée. He stood on the threshold which thousands of chained and branded Negro slaves had crossed on a journey from which they would never return. For a long time, he stood there, sad, silent, and absorbed in thought before the sea. In Senegal, John Paul II proposed political change in Africa through the setting up of a kind of conference for peace and cooperation. In a red, dusty clearing among the ruins of Huambo in Angola, with the hulks of helicopters and tanks all round, the Pope raised a cry against the evils of hatred and war. Here, Cuban soldiers used to shoot their prisoners, and it was from here that the Pope launched a passionate appeal for peace and reconciliation. At Sao Tome, another embarkation point for Negro slave ships, the Pope again deplored the cruel offense offered to the dignity of the African by the slave trade. After recovering from his operation in July, the Pope once again started on his trips abroad. In October, he was in Santo Domingo to celebrate the 500th anniversary of Columbus' discovery. He celebrated 500 years of spreading the gospel in America with a Mass by the sea. The Magna Carta, outlining the Church's teaching, is one of the most important events in the recent history of the Church, and now a fundamental text for the Church. On December the 7th, John Paul II presented the new Catechism of the Catholic Church during a solemn ceremony in the Sala Regia of the Vatican. A copy of the new Catechism was given to 5 bishops, 1 from each continent, and 3 couples of newlyweds, young people and children, a simple gesture to symbolize its presentation to the universal Church. An important gesture of love towards Rome. On October the 3rd, John Paul II set up the Diocesan Synod in the Lateran Cathedral. In simple, unrhetorical terms, he presented it for what it was, an example of the Church serving the city. Synod means to walk together, and putting to one side for a moment all the grand strategies and sociological insights, this was exactly what the Synod was meant to be, the Catholics in Rome walking together towards the city. After 6 years' preparation, the 1,200 members of the Synod began their final 8 months of discussion. One of the Bishop of Rome's most remarkable gestures was a visit to the kitchens of Caritas in Colle Oppio, where he was surrounded by homeless vagabonds and immigrants from all over the world. On December 20th, with the Christmas season in full swing, he threw down a kind of challenge by turning the immigration problem on its head. Not only should immigrants be welcomed, they should be fully integrated into society. In the canteen, the Pope sat down for a short meal with the guests of the first sitting. About 20 poor people ate alongside John Paul II and Don Luigi Di Liegro, the charismatic director of Caritas for this diocese. Seated in front of the Pope was Valentino Nogali, a homeless Italian with a Somalian mother whom a group of criminals had tried to burn alive a few weeks before. 12 years after it was first convened, the committee set up by the Pope to study the case of Galileo finished its task. The conclusions are an important contribution to the work accomplished during this year of John Paul II's pontificate. On October 31st, John Paul II gave his final judgment on the matter before a meeting of the Vatican's Academy of Science. A completely different kind of event, but of no less importance, was the beatification of Monsignor José María Escrivá, the founder of Opus Dei, and Mother Giuseppina Bakhita. The ceremony took place in front of an estimated crowd of at least 250,000, too many even for St. Peter's Square to hold. In June, the Church Statistics Office published its most recent figures. Since the beginning of John Paul II's papacy in 1978, the number of Catholics had risen by about 200 million. At the beginning of the 1990s, there were more than 928.5 million Catholics, 17.7% of the world's population. No small part has been played in this growth by John Paul II's missionary zeal and the testimony of his faith in Christ, the Virgin Mary, and the Gospel, a testimony to which he has dedicated his life.
關心戰亂、關心貧窮同埋被壓迫者， 關心人類嘅罪惡同埋種種罪行，係教宗一向以嚟最銘記於心嘅事情。佢經常為此感到哀傷，甚至係感到非常之憤怒，而且佢不斷以一個精神同埋宗教領袖嘅身份要全人類反省呢啲人類自己嘅問題。由於教宗嘅努力同埋傳教熱忱，喺佢上任以嚟全球嘅天主教徒嘅人數喺14年裏邊係增加咗2億人。教宗若望保祿二世嘅另外一個特點就係勇於承擔責任，承認天主教會過去所犯過嘅錯誤，甚至係一啲罪行，為伽利略平反，可以講話就係一個最好嘅例子啦。喺1993年，教宗做咗14次嘅牧民探訪，其中有9次喺意大利。影片一開始嘅時候我哋就睇到教宗強烈譴責活躍喺意大利南部西西里島嘅黑手黨。黑手黨即係所謂嘅 Mafia， 係一個無惡不作嘅黑社會組織。有人話西西里島係冇王管嘅，實際上正係黑手黨喺度管治緊呢個西西里。教宗話佢哋提倡嘅係死亡文化，而為咗道路、為咗真理、為咗生命，教宗向黑手黨人呼籲，希望佢哋悔改。果然最後有啲成員聽到教宗呢啲説話之後就真係走出去悔改。我哋以前講過，教宗一向以嚟都係要對一啲不公正、不正義嘅事情挑戰。佢曾經批判過共產黨嘅統治。而對於喺西西里島橫行無忌嘅黑手黨佢亦都無所畏懼。黑手黨呢一個現象反映咗一個問題，就係教宗雖然反對共產主義統治，但係佢對資本主義並非係全盤接納。資本主義出現嘅貧富懸殊、罪惡、倫理失衡等等，都係對自由嘅侮辱。教宗強調，人類社會已經失去道德嘅準繩，而只有天主教會捍衛嘅倫理法則，先至係民主嘅保證。喺片集裏邊，教宗強調，我哋要站喺被剝削嘅人嘅嗰一邊。佢非常厭惡資本主義社會裏邊剝削、壓迫同埋欺壓弱小嘅權貴者。雖然佢曾經批判共產主義，但係佢亦都肯定，就係話過去喺共產黨嘅統治底下，共產黨人亦都曾經努力解決過失業貧窮問題，同埋關懷勞苦大眾。呢一年，教宗去咗一個好危險嘅地方，就係蘇丹。點解呢個地方咁危險呢？就因為喺嗰度北方嘅伊斯蘭信徒同埋南方嘅黑人基督徒已經打咗10年嘅內戰。教宗強調唔可以以宗教作為暴力同埋不正義嘅藉口。佢喺蘇丹譴責伊斯蘭教徒使用暴力，而喺波斯尼亞問題上邊佢就保護嗰啲信奉回教嘅波斯尼亞人，譴責嗰啲屠殺佢哋嘅塞爾維亞人。喺呢一年嘅年底，發生咗一件好重要嘅事情，就係梵蒂岡同以色列正式建交，恢復咗同猶太教嘅正常關係。教宗甚至希望喺2000年嘅時候去耶路撒冷朝聖。呢一件劃時代嘅事件喺片嘅最後尾係得到反映。
e questi che sono colpevoli di disturbare questa pace, questi vi portano sulle loro coscienze tante vittime umane, devono capire che non si permette di uccidere innocenti. Io ho detto una volta, non uccidere, non può un uomo, qualsiasi umana aggregazione ampia, non può cambiare e calpestare questo diritto santissimo di Dio. Questo popolo siciliano, talmente attaccato alla vita, popolo che ama la vita, che dà la vita, non può vivere sempre sotto la pressione di una civiltà contraria, civiltà della morte. Qui ci vuole civiltà della vita. Nel nome di questo Cristo, crocifisso e risorto, di questo Cristo che è vita, via, verità e vita. Lo dico ai responsabili, convertitevi una volta per il giudizio di Dio.
Thus, with biblical force and passion, John Paul II spoke during a visit to Sicily in the middle of 1993, his 15th year in office. In subsequent years, there were to be members of the mafia who would repent, declaring that they had taken the decision to leave the illegal organization to which they belonged after hearing this warning from the Pope on television, with his voice full of anger, his look tense, his right arm raised in a tight fist, pointing an accusing finger. John Paul II had brought back invective as a form of papal preaching, as well as using the expulsion of the merchants from the temple as one of the evangelical metaphors put forward for Christian reflection. In 1993, John Paul II carried out 14 pastoral missions, of which 5 journeys took him outside Italy and 9 to an equal number of Italian places. His work rate and the number of journeys showed that the Pope had recovered well after his operation for a colon tumor in July 1992.
Finora ancora cammino sui miei piedi anche nelle montagne. Faccio tutto il possibile per mantenermi in ordine, non creare problemi per la...
It appeared that he was indeed well. This was the first day of a tiring journey that would take him to Jamaica, the Yucatan, and the United States of America, culminating in a meeting with young people in Denver, one of the youth days that have rewarded John Paul II's decision to speak to young people. But the journalists observed during an interview on the plane that his left hand trembled. It was the first sign of an illness of the nervous system that was to cause him much anguish in subsequent years. But it was not just the tremble that worried those who observed him. A fall during an audience in the blessing room at the Vatican on the 11th of November caused a dislocation of the right shoulder and again sounded the alarm as regards his health.
Giovedì scorso, come ben sapete, sono stato costretto ad una breve sosta in ospedale, essendo caduto mentre scendevo i gradini del podio per avvicinarmi ai presenti al termine di un'udienza. Esprimo di cuore la mia gratitudine a quanti con premurosa disponibilità mi hanno immediatamente prodigate le necessarie cure sanitarie. Ringrazio inoltre le numerose persone che mi sono state vicine con il calore della loro simpatia e soprattutto con il prezioso conforto della preghiera.
Luckily, he is able to joke about it, helped by his imaginative Italian, which seems to double the affection of the crowd. Both because of his health and because of the heavier commitments of this stage of his period in office, 1993 was a year of transition. John Paul II's involvement in the drama of former Yugoslavia was increasing, and was to culminate the following year with a visit to Zagreb and an attempt to visit Sarajevo. And the same can be said for his defense of life and for his end of millennium summing up, matters that were to have great importance a few months later and that in some ways had already been announced. But this transition year was dominated by a doctrinal announcement of great importance, the encyclical Veritatis Splendor, the Splendor of Truth, which was published on the 5th of October. This was a challenge to the moral relativism of Western culture and could be regarded as the manifesto of the mature stage of his term in office. John Paul II, who had fought communism in the name of liberty, now denounced Western culture that sought to transform freedom into an absolute value. He accused it of not having objective criteria for distinguishing good from bad, and stated that this was the most dangerous crisis now threatening humanity.
After the fall of the ideologies that linked politics to a totalitarian concept of the world, and the first among these was Marxism, there is now a risk that is no less serious of negation of the fundamental rights of human beings. It is a risk that stems from the alliance between democracy and moral relativism, which removes every definite point of moral reference from civil community life and denies it the recognition of truth. The universal and unchangeable moral laws defended by the Church are the foundation and guarantee of true democracy. It makes no difference whether one is the ruler of the world or the most destitute person on the face of the earth. When faced with moral demands, we are all absolutely equal.
The Pope threw down this moral challenge to the Western world with the same strength he had shown in giving a warning to the mafia, and the same strength that he would soon afterwards display in tackling Islamic fundamentalism and in speaking to crowds of young Americans. It was during the World Youth Day that he held in August in Denver that John Paul II delivered a strong warning that was entirely in line with the Veritatis Splendor.
For all those who commit crimes against the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," Christ on the cross is a sign of their wrongdoing. Do not fear. The outcome of the battle for life has already been decided, even if the struggle continues in difficult circumstances and with much suffering. Ill befall he who fails to defend life.
His visit to Khartoum, capital of Sudan, on the 10th of February 1993 was perhaps the most hazardous mission of his period in office. The Islamic Sharia law had been in force for 2 years, and a violent civil war between the Muslim Arab North and the black animist and Christian South had been raging for 10 years. That war was the violent aspect of the difficult interface between Islam and Christianity, which for a century has split the entire African continent, and which becomes dramatic along the sub-Saharan belt, precisely in regions where Arab and black peoples face each other. To the amazement of observers who considered such a mission too risky, the Pope made a visit lasting a few hours.
Qui nostro compito della Chiesa, della Santa Sede, dei nunzi, di Monsignor, dei vescovi è sempre quella di ricordare ai governi, ai governanti che sono musulmani che la legge coranica può riferirsi solamente ai credenti dell'Islam. Non si può imporre questa legge assolutamente a quelli che hanno altra fede, che sono cristiani. Andando dovunque c'è un rischio. Ma soprattutto era questo rischio principale di cui ho parlato sopra, questo rischio di Gesù mandando i 12 pescatori andate in tutto il mondo. Allora, dentro questi principi possiamo poi fare un calcolo sui rischi. Vedremo. Per me la cosa sembra, non dico sembra provvidenziale.
The Pope was obviously saying that the peaceful intention of his visit was that of promoting a new relationship between Christians and Muslims, and at the end he gave a strong warning against fundamentalism, one that no one in Khartoum had been able to give before, and no one has been able to deliver since.
Using religion as a pretext for injustice and violence is a terrible abuse, and must be condemned by all those who truly believe in God.
This warning to Islam was the strongest of the three main ones that John Paul II has addressed during his term in office to this difficult interlocutor which feels tempted by the use of violence in the name of faith. The other two would subsequently be issued in Tunis and in Abuja in Nigeria in 1996 and in 1998. Why do we say that the warning given in Khartoum was stronger than those of Tunis and of Abuja? Not because of the strength of his words, which was always the same, nor because the situation was more difficult, given that in Tunis he addressed the situation in Algeria, where the drama of violence is at its worst, while in Abuja he referred to the violence, which could not be overlooked, that Christians were suffering in the north of Nigeria. The words that he spoke in Khartoum were the strongest because the Pope sent the violent men of Islam the same appeal that he had issued exactly a month earlier at Assisi on the occasion of the Day of Fasting and Prayer for Peace in former Yugoslavia. On that occasion he spoke in defense of the Muslims of Bosnia and against the ethnic cleansing carried out by Serbs. The Pope who on the 10th of February in Khartoum condemned Islamic violence was the same Pope who on the 10th of January in Assisi had with the same words defended followers of Islam against Christian violence. Once again referring to Bosnia, when the conflict flared up more violently in mid-1993, John Paul II issued this appeal.
Rivolgo ancora una volta un pressante appello a tutti, ai belligeranti. Cessate la guerra. Essa degrada l'uomo e lo spinge a comportamenti indegni ed inconfessabili.
On the 2nd of November in the autumn of 1993, John Paul II gave Jas Gravonsky this statement for the media.
At the end of this millennium, we must certainly examine our conscience, where we are, where Christ has led us, where we have strayed from the Gospels.
These words were important and were to be greatly developed in subsequent years. The end of millennium examination, dubbed mea culpa by the media, was the most original initiative of his term in office and one of the statements that was most open to the future. In the same interview, the Pope spoke of his commitment to the defense of exploited people throughout the world.
I understood what exploitation was, and I immediately took the side of the poor, the disinherited, the oppressed, the outcast, and the undefended. The powerful people of this world have never had a positive view of such a Pope.
John Paul II is not afraid of words. He talks of exploitation, oppression, and those in power. These are words used by communist propaganda, but are also biblical words, and above all they apply to the poor and the workers.
I think that if there has been a determining role, it has been that of Christianity as such, in its content, in its religious and moral message, which offer an intrinsic defense of human beings and their rights. And I have done nothing other than recall, repeat, and insist that this is a principle that should be followed.
During the interview, the Pope surprised the interviewer with the following observation on the good things and the seeds of truth that lie within communism.
The champions of capitalism at any cost tend not to recognize that communism has also achieved some good things. Its struggle against unemployment, its concern for the poor. Under communism, there was a regard for social matters, while capitalism is somewhat individualistic.
Obviously, this statement did not put in question his overall judgment of communism. On the 25th of April 1993, he was at last able to visit Albania, which had just emerged from communist dictatorship that had been terribly oppressive against all religions. The Pope said,
"What happened in Albania has never been recorded in history."
In autumn, he was able to visit the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, which had also just emerged from Soviet domination. John Paul II addressed these words to the persecutors of religion who had been rampant in those countries for almost half a century.
Man is weak as a victim, and perhaps still weaker when he is the oppressor.
At the end of 1993, John Paul II tried to persuade his own collaborators that the fall of communism did not amount to a moral validation of capitalism. 1993 ended with a major agreement between the Vatican and the State of Israel, which was signed on the 30th of December. This led to the announcement of full diplomatic relations, which were assumed on the 15th of June the following year. It was an important step in the long journey that John Paul II had made in the direction of the Jews, whom he described as elder brothers when he visited the Rome synagogue, and towards Jerusalem, where he planned to go as a pilgrim for the great Jubilee of the year 2000. On 16th October 1993, the 15th year of his papacy, he asked the Lord to allow him to devote himself to the service of the Church, unconditionally.
May I be granted the strength necessary to do all that I can, indeed to burn myself out in following the example of Paul in the service of the Church.
喺呢一集裏邊，教宗不斷強調反對暴力同埋戰爭，而我哋知道喺戰爭嘅背後呢，好多時候呢，竟然係宗教衝突。佢當然反對其他宗教人士殺害基督徒。但佢同樣反對塞爾維亞人屠殺信奉伊斯蘭教嘅波斯尼亞人。教宗亦都表達對資本主義黑暗面嘅不滿。資本主義漠視壓迫嘅現象同埋被剝削者嘅慘況，係令到教宗耿耿於懷。人性尊嚴係佢恆久關心嘅問題。教宗喺呢一年裏邊呢，佢亦都訪問咗一啲以前嘅蘇聯東歐陣營嘅國家，其中包括波羅的海3個國家，同埋過去親近中國嘅阿爾巴尼亞。喺過去半個世紀裏邊呢，天主教徒喺呢啲國家裏邊都受到迫害。教宗嘅訪問唔單單標榜住梵蒂岡同呢啲國家關係正常化，亦都意味住宗教自由喺呢啲國家裏邊呢，終於得到尊重。影片從一開始，教宗就帶我哋去遊花園。其實佢係要好婉轉咁樣表示，佢係要踏住天主子民嘅足跡，走得遠一啲。遠成點呢？其實佢嘅願望就係要去中國，去探訪中國嘅教會。呢個就係佢正在開始準備千禧年嘅大計之一。1994年係國際家庭年，聯合國喺開羅會議提出咗節育同埋計劃生育嘅重要性。教宗認為一方面發達國家只不過係顧住自己嘅利益，而佢哋唔希望發展中國家貧困人口增加；而另一方面呢，佢都要捍衛天主教會反對絕育、墮胎等等嘅立場，所以佢抨擊聯合國會議嘅草案。 天主教會非常重視人性、生命尊嚴、愛同埋奉獻，而家庭呢，正是人類文明嘅根源。喺呢一集裏邊，我哋將會睇到好多教宗關於呢一方面嘅訓示。教宗喺呢一年呢，好少外訪，佢好想去陷於戰亂嘅黎巴嫩同埋薩拉熱窩，希望為制止戰爭盡一分力，但係佢並冇成功。佢強烈要求訪問位於波斯尼亞嘅薩拉熱窩、塞爾維亞首都布爾格萊德同埋克羅地亞嘅薩格勒市。去薩拉熱窩終於係無法成行，因為佢嘅安全呢，連聯合國部隊都無法保障。佢亦都去唔成布爾格萊德，只係去得成薩格勒市。喺呢一度，佢好痛苦地表達佢對戰爭嘅厭惡。呢一年，教宗開始構想慶祝千禧年嘅重要節目。佢要召開各大基督教派嘅聚會。佢亦都想咧，就係召開包括基督教、猶太教同埋回教嘅大型聚會。佢要紀念殉道者，同埋更加重要嘅就係佢想檢討教會過去所犯過嘅過失，承認同埋懺悔過去犯過嘅錯誤同埋罪行。佢認為只有勇於承擔，先至能夠有效地廣傳福音。呢個就係若望保祿二世俾我哋嘅一個最重要嘅啟示。儘管好多主教當時都認為唔可以以今日嘅想法去評價往日嘅事情，但係教宗依然堅持己見。佢認為我哋一定要自我檢討，要光明磊落。
Mio desiderio globale nel periodo che precede l'anno 2000 sarebbe di andare un po' sulle orme del popolo di Dio. E sappiamo bene che questo popolo di Dio, la sua storia comincia con Abramo, che è stato chiamato dalla sua patria, allora in questo ambiente, e poi ha fatto i suoi pellegrinaggi seguendo la voce di Dio e ha dato inizio al popolo di Dio. Lui era padre di tutti i credenti. Allora sarebbe questa idea di poter camminare lungo i sentieri del popolo di Dio in Vecchio Testamento e poi naturalmente passando arrivando in Terra Santa, a Nazareth, Betlemme, Gerusalemme soprattutto, un po' ritrovare le strade apostoliche che hanno condotto verso Antiochia, verso Damasco, soprattutto Damasco. Io finora ho vagabondato, ho viaggiato attraverso il mondo, diverse parti del mondo, ma si deve arrivare alla fine in questi luoghi sacri, in questa terra di Gesù. Il Papa deve qualche volta dire le parole un po' azzardate, no? Non è più che una sorpresa se il Papa dice io voglio andare in Cina, ma se il Vescovo di Roma visiti le tue parrocchie, non pensi ad andare in Cina. Ma si deve dire qualche cosa, anche una parola coraggiosa, se non azzardata, certamente coraggiosa. Si aspettano quelle parole, e non solamente le parole, ma anche i gesti. Naturalmente una visita alla Chiesa in Cina sarebbe un grande desiderio.
1994 was a year of great plans, almost a fresh start of the Bishop of Rome's pontifical mission. In this 16th year of his term in office, John Paul planned the Great Jubilee for the year 2000, and with a view to that date, invited the Church to make an end-of-millennium self-assessment. As we've heard, he planned to bring to fulfillment his dream of making a pilgrimage in the footsteps of Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, whom he had followed since his election. He saw that pilgrimage as the final destination of all his travels around the world, which meanwhile he had to continue, and the Pope even considered visiting China. But 1994 was also a year of great suffering. His fall in his bathroom and the prosthesis on his right femur forced him to use a stick. The progress of the war in Bosnia and the resumption of attacks in Lebanon had prevented him from visiting these two countries as he had long planned. Such was his desire to go that he had announced the dates of both journeys, but had then been forced to postpone them. 1994 was also, paradoxically, the year in which the American magazine Time named John Paul as the Man of the Year, a decision that was taken during the months when the Pope was conducting a tough battle, almost a personal campaign, against the UN's anti-birth policy. That's to say, the policy that tended to promote birth control and which was steered by the United States itself.
Io vorrei che sia attraverso la Maria espressa oggi la mia gratitudine per questo dono della sofferenza nuovamente collegato con il mese mariano di maggio. Voglio ringraziare per questo dono. Ho capito che è un dono necessario, che si doveva trovare il Papa in Policlinico Gemelli, doveva essere assente a questa finestra durante 4 settimane, 4 domeniche, doveva soffrire, come ha dovuto soffrire 13 anni fa, così anche in questo anno.
The Pope's first attack on the United Nations draft document for the Cairo World Population Conference was on the 18th of March 1994. On that day, he received Mrs. Nafis Sadiq, Secretary General of the conference. He accused the UN document of not condemning sterilization and abortion, of ignoring marriage as if it belonged to the past, and moreover, he accused it of focusing on birth control instead of development. The Pope knew that behind that document lay the powerful interests of the developed world, which was alarmed by the increasing number of poor people on the planet. Aware that his words had little power compared with those interests, he spoke out strongly. The following day, the 19th of March, while speaking to the workers in Nervi Hall, he said,
Quali soluzioni al problema della povertà cercano di imporre alle nazioni povere gli onnipotenti possessori del capitale? Essi propongono come mezzo principale la distruzione del diritto alla vita. Non è questa una palese assurdità?
To make one's voice heard by the United Nations, it is not enough to speak out strongly. It was for this reason that on the 25th of March, the Cardinal Secretary of State, acting on the Pope's orders, called in all the accredited ambassadors for an information meeting to express the Pope's deep concern with a view to the conference. But the Pope was not content with just ambassadors. He wanted to reach out to the leaders. It was Easter, the 3rd of April, and in his message, Urbi et Orbi, he announced that he had written a letter to every head of state in the world to request that
sia compiuto ogni sforzo affinché non venga sminuito il valore della persona umana, né il carattere sacro della vita, né la capacità dell'uomo di amare e di donarsi. La famiglia rimane la principale fonte di umanità. Ogni Stato deve tutelarla come prezioso tesoro.
after Easter, he had a day of rest at Castel Gandolfo and a trip to the Abruzzi Mountains. It was his last walk in the mountains before falling in his bathroom. Just after returning to Rome, during the general audience of the 6th of April, he said, speaking spontaneously in the strongest terms,
We are concerned that this year of the family should not become a year against the family. And it could easily become a year against the family if these draft documents truly become the drafts of the World Conference in Cairo. We protest. We cannot go into the future with a plan for the systematic death of the unborn.
"1994 was a year almost without journeys. with fewer papal travels than in any year since 1981, the year of the assassination attempt. In that year, John Paul had made one international journey and 3 trips in Italy for a total of 14 days, while in 1994 his travels came to a total of 7 days. He visited Zagreb, capital of Croatia, on the 10th and 11th of September, and 3 Italian cities, Lecce, Catania and Syracuse, in October and November. It's well known that John Paul suffers when he cannot travel, and especially when he's forced by war to abandon long-planned journeys that have already been announced. One can say that his greatest suffering in 1994 was caused by the forced cancellation of his journeys to Lebanon and Sarajevo, due to the guerrilla war in Lebanon and to the Bosnia War. His visit to Lebanon had been a long-standing wish. John Paul had been talking about it since the beginning of his term in office, especially in 1982. He had resumed his plans almost every year, until he felt able to announce that he would make the visit in May 1994. But a series of attacks on Catholic churches, apparently inspired by the Maronite right wing, which feared that the papal visit would be seen as legitimizing the Syrian occupation of the country, forced him to postpone it. Still more dramatic was the cancellation of his visit to Sarajevo, besieged by Serbian-Bosnian troops and ill-protected by UN forces. After waiting for 3 years, and given the impossibility of planning a normal visit, John Paul took a courageous leap in the dark with his unilateral decision, the only such decision in his 20 years in office, that he would visit Sarajevo on the 8th of September. The original plan had been to make a combined journey to Sarajevo in Bosnia, Belgrade in Serbia, and Zagreb in Croatia. He had to cancel the Belgrade stage immediately because of the opposition of the Orthodox Patriarch. Throughout the summer, John Paul kept up his demands that he should be allowed to visit Sarajevo, and his persistence moved the world. He cancelled the journey only on the 6th of September, 2 days before the date fixed for his visit, after the leader of the UN forces in former Yugoslavia, the Japanese Akashi, declared that he was unable to guarantee his safety during the visit. Not being able to visit Sarajevo on the 8th of September, John Paul celebrated Mass that same day in the courtyard of the summer residence of Castel Gandolfo, together with the Catholic community of the Bosnian capital. He read the homily that he had planned to deliver in Sarajevo Stadium. He shouted, "Enough of war." He invited the Catholics to forgive and to ask for forgiveness. He condemned ethnic cleansing. He requested that the sanctions against Serbia should be reconsidered. He sent a kiss of peace to the Patriarch of the Serbian Orthodox Church, Pavle, who had not wanted him in Belgrade. On the 10th and 11th of September, he visited Zagreb and repeated the same appeals and warnings. The television cameras showed him in pain, looking lost, unsteady on his feet, but helped by his stick, even if he did not yet know how to use it properly. He was shorn of any desire to make jokes and to improvise. His physical suffering, which had never before been so obvious, perfectly reflected his moral suffering in not being able to embrace the free peoples, the Croatians, Serbs and Bosnians, that he wanted to bring together. And he was also hurt by the fact that his repeated calls for forgiveness had never received spontaneous acclaim from the people. As regards the war in Bosnia, John Paul continuously spoke out throughout the whole of 1994. These are the impassioned words that he spoke during a service for peace in the Balkans that was held in the Vatican Basilica on the 23rd of January 1994, during the period when he took his decision to announce his visit unilaterally.
Non siete abbandonati, siamo con voi e saremo con voi e sempre più saremo con voi. Questa lettera ai bambini, naturalmente, è indirizzata ai bambini. Loro sono i destinatari. Sono invitati per pregare per la pace. Dappertutto, dovunque c'è la guerra, dovunque manca la pace, là si invita la preghiera dei bambini. Così questa lettera è indirizzata anche a quelli che sono responsabili delle guerre, lontane e vicine. Pensiamo a tutti, ma forse con speciale insistenza a quelli vicini, dell'altra sponda dell'Adriatico. E a questi diciamo, oggi, quarta domenica d'Avvento, 6 giorni prima del Natale, diciamo fermatevi davanti al bambino.
1994 was dominated by planning for the Great Jubilee, and the whole pontificate seemed to be guided by anticipation of this event, the transition from the second to the third millennium. And now John Paul gave notice that it was time to begin the preparations in earnest. It was only 6 years short of the year 2000, and he committed himself to that undertaking with the energy of a newly elected pope, calling an extraordinary consistory that met in mid-June. Speaking to the cardinals, he put forward 5 initiatives that were without precedent in the history of the Church. The convocation of a series of continental synods for the Americas, Asia, and the Pacific. A pan-Christian meeting bringing together all the Christian churches for the second millennium celebration of the birth of Christ to be held in Bethlehem or Jerusalem. A further meeting of the 3 monotheistic faiths, the Jews, Christians, and Muslims, on Mount Sinai. Martyrology would be brought up to date so that the martyrs of all Christian churches could be given prominence before the world. These were the martyrs who had given their lives for faith, charity, and justice in every part of the world during our century. The 5th initiative was the most original and courageous of all, an end of millennium assessment delving into the dark pages of church history.
Di fronte a questo grande giubileo, la Chiesa ha bisogno della metanoia, cioè del discernimento delle mancanze storiche e delle negligenze dei suoi figli nei confronti delle esigenze del Vangelo. Solo il riconoscimento coraggioso delle colpe e anche delle omissioni di cui i cristiani si sono resi in qualche modo responsabili, come pure il generoso proposito di rimediarvi con l'aiuto di Dio, possono dare efficace impulso alla nuova evangelizzazione e rendere più facile il cammino verso l'unità.
Almost all the cardinals who spoke on this subject urged the Pope to be careful about this assessment, not wanting the past to be judged in terms of present-day values. John Paul listened to this advice and took account of it, but did not abandon this historic assessment. He again proposed it in the apostolic letter Tertio Millennio Adveniente that was published on the 14th of November 1994.
The holy door of the year 2000 Jubilee should symbolically be greater than those of previous years, because on reaching that goal, humanity is leaving behind not just a century, but a millennium. It will be best for the Church to make this transition with a clear conscience as regards what has occurred during the last 10 centuries. It cannot cross the threshold of the new millennium without urging its children to purify themselves in repentance for mistakes, faithlessness, inconsistency, and delays. Recognizing the failures of the past is an act of sincerity and of courage that will enable us to strengthen our faith, putting us on guard and making us ready to face the temptations and difficulties of the present.
His fall in the bathroom of his apartment the day before he was due to leave on a journey to Sicily prevented John Paul from departing.
Do you think that the Pope is happy or unhappy? You must decide. They are treating me, they are carrying out tests. I have had more tests during this period than ever before in my life. They are making a thorough examination of my body. I was not even aware that there were so many organs and so many possibilities.
A prosthesis was implanted in his right femur, which enabled him to walk in the mountains again and to travel around the world, but which forced him to rely on a stick. The world press continuously spoke about his health, and some of the media made forecasts as to the duration of his term in office. He sensed that even the crowds at the Sunday audiences were wondering how he really was.
Ogni domenica fate un controllo del Papa, se sta bene o se sta meglio. Ecco. Faremo il nostro possibile. Sia lodato Gesù Cristo. Arrivederci.
His suffering and his difficulty in walking did not put a brake on John Paul II's apostolic energy, nor on his vitality, because Christ is always young, as he said in Crossing the Threshold of Hope, an interview book in which he replied in writing to a series of questions by the journalist Vittorio Messori. This was published on the 19th of October 1994. In the same book, he said that young people renewed his youthfulness, and he revealed what lay behind his enthusiasm for dialogue with the new generations, in which he perceived the hopes of the world and of the Church.
We need the joy of life that young people have. In this is reflected something of the original joy that God had when he created man.
結尾嘅時候喺片裏邊提到，教宗身體不適，行動不便，但係佢仍然充滿活力，因為耶穌係歷久常新嘅。佢話係年青人恢復咗佢嘅青春活力，由青年人出發，佢回應咗聯合國嘅國際家庭年。佢反對節育同埋絕育，實際上係表達佢對人性尊嚴嘅尊重，同埋愛與奉獻喺推動人類進步方面起到嘅，正如但丁所講嘅宜太陽動群星嘅作用。教宗喺呢一年已經開始準備迎接千禧年嘅5種主要嘅活動。佢除咗想同各個宗教組織合辦聚會之外，最引人注目嘅就係佢想徹底檢討教會歷史上邊黑暗嘅一頁。若望保祿二世呢一種無私無畏嘅精神，勇於承認教會過去所犯過嘅過失，贏得咗世人普遍嘅尊重。踏入1995年，從一開始大家睇到嘅就係教宗喺馬尼拉主持嘅普世青年節。其實教宗喺呢一年嘅外訪活動裏邊，佢去過好多國家，好多都有特殊嘅意義。佢去過捷克，為一位波希米亞嘅神父舉行宣福禮，因為佢曾經俾基督新教處死。對於呢一個宣福禮，捷克福音派就頗為反感，因為當年佢哋都有好多人係俾天主教徒處死嘅，所以教宗亦都請求波希米亞人為咗天主教會所犯下嘅過錯而寬恕。喺史洛伐克，同樣嘅事情都係發生咗。教宗為3個17世紀俾基督新教處死嘅神父宣福，如同喺頭先提到嘅捷克嘅情況一樣，亦都招致福音派嘅反對。因為當年佢哋的確有一啲殉道者係俾天主教徒處死。於是教宗就走到加爾文教會殉道者嘅紀念碑前邊祈禱，祈求對方寬恕。呢一啲行動大大緩和咗對抗嘅情緒，亦都明顯有助於合一運動。喺秋天，教宗訪問非洲，佢同意將非洲黑人文化融入教宗禮儀裏邊。將非洲教會禮儀非洲化，換句話講就係有更加多載歌載舞嘅場面。喺影片裏邊大家可以睇到彌撒前嘅歌舞。教宗喺非洲訪問嘅高潮就係喺南非會晤南非嘅民權鬥士曼德拉。佢哋兩位都係喺漫長嘅歲月裏邊為自由而奮鬥。教宗當年反對嘅就係波蘭共產黨嘅統治，而曼德拉喺監獄裏邊坐咗27年， 佢反對嘅就係當時南非白人政權嘅種族隔離政策。二者最終都勝利，如今互相致敬，並且感激對方嘅支持。
It is the night before one of John Paul II's most memorable encounters with a crowd of young people. The morning after this vigil, more than 2 million people were to gather in that same park. Some say 3 million, some even 4. What is certain is that it was the biggest crowd of all the journeys the Pope has made. John Paul II stood up well to the strain of this major occasion, as indeed he did during the subsequent days and the following stages. The journey took him to New Guinea, Australia and Sri Lanka, keeping him busy for a total of 11 days. He was surprised that he could still make long journeys after the fall that had forced him to use a walking stick.
Tutto va bene, ma la gamba non è ancora sufficientemente forte e si deve appoggiare questa gamba con bastone. Questa è la situazione realistica, psicomedica. Io sono un po' sorpreso, non credo di trovarmi di nuovo in Italia con la prospettiva di andare fino alle Filippine. 10 ore di volo, no? 10, 11. L'ultima volta era Zagabria, era un'ora.
After making such a good start in January with his journey to the Far East, the year of 1995 was to be full of international travels. The first appointment was in May in the Czech Republic.
Today, I, the Pope of the Church of Rome, ask forgiveness in the name of all Catholics for the wrongs inflicted on non-Catholics during the troubled history of these peoples. And at the same time, I offer the forgiveness of the Catholic Church for whatever ills its children have suffered.
At Olomouc, John Paul II proclaimed Jan Sarkande, a Bohemian priest, to be blessed with the title of martyr. Sarkande had been put to death by the Protestant authorities during the religious wars, which in those parts were the most violent in Europe and lasted for a century and a half. The Evangelical Church considered this beatification provocative. Some of its representatives had not attended the ecumenical meeting that the Pope held in Prague the day before. It was this dramatic opposition that prompted John Paul to make the unexpected gesture of seeking and offering forgiveness from and to the Bohemian brothers. The world press considered his announcement ingenious, while the Bohemian evangelicals said they were astonished. His gesture was sufficient in itself to turn the situation around. So much so that when he made a further visit to Prague in April 1997, John Paul II no longer met the same resentful opposition, and all the evangelical guests invited to the ecumenical meeting at St. Vitus Cathedral were present. John Paul II achieved a similar reversal of an unfavourable ecumenical situation when he visited Slovakia, a little more than a month after seeking and offering forgiveness at Olomouc. It was the 2nd of July 1997, and the Pope was in Kosice, where he proclaimed 3 priests who had been put to death by the Protestant authorities in 1619 to be blessed and martyrs. As had already happened at Olomouc, the proclamation brought protests from evangelicals, who had gathered the night before around the monument commemorating 24 evangelical martyrs executed by the Catholic authorities at Prešov in 1687. In his sermon at Kosice in the morning, the Pope paid homage to the spiritual depth of the evangelical martyrs, and in the afternoon, in a last-minute decision, he went on foot, in silence, in the rain, to pray at the monument of the Calvinist martyrs in a corner of the square in the old city of Prešov. It was the most humble and unexpected of John Paul's ecumenical moves. He prayed in silence before the plaque, perhaps seeking forgiveness from those poor Christians who, because of their faith, refusing to submit to the Pope, had been killed in the name of the faith of other Christians who supported the Pope. Also present was the Lutheran Bishop of Prešov, Jan Midriak, who after the silent prayer greeted the Pope and thanked him for his visit. Between these two missions to the Czech and the Slovak republics, John Paul made another journey to Belgium at the beginning of June. These were all countries that the Pope had already visited. He had been to Czechoslovakia in April 1990, just after the wall had fallen, and had visited Belgium in 1985. On this second occasion, he visited only Brussels, where he proclaimed the missionary Damien de Venusta to be blessed. De Venusta was known throughout the world as the Damien, father of the lepers, who spent 16 years at Molokai in Hawaii treating lepers and died of leprosy a century ago. But the Pope was also in Belgium to pay homage to the memory of King Baudouin, the gentle, pious sovereign who had temporarily abdicated in order not to have to sign the law that legalized abortion. From the moment of his arrival at the airport, John Paul II spoke of Baudouin as a saint of our times. On the 9th and 10th of September, John Paul was at the sanctuary of Loreto, where he took part in the conclusion of a pilgrimage of young European people, which involved him in a long vigil. During the vigil, he conducted a televised link-up with Sarajevo, whose tragedy continued to dominate his thoughts and feelings. Still in September, there was another major journey that took the Pope to Africa for the 11th time. From the 14th to the 20th of September, John Paul visited 3 capitals representing the entire continent: Yaoundé in Cameroon, Johannesburg in South Africa, and Nairobi in Kenya. The journey had this official name: the celebration stage of the Special Assembly for Africa of the Bishops' Synod. The name referred to the African Synod that had been held in Rome in the spring of 1994. On the 15th of September, in the office of the Nuncio of Yaoundé, the Pope signed the post-Synod Apostolic Exhortation Ecclesia in Africa, which contained the Synod's conclusions. In this, John Paul called for strengthening Christianity in the culture of Black Africa and helped to focus world attention on the latter by authorizing a daring change to the papal liturgy, in keeping with the new rites that the African churches were experimenting with. These rites were seen at the opening and closure of the Synod at St. Peter's in Rome, and gave a signal to everyone that the future of Catholicism would be more lively and colourful than in the recent past. And now the dances and songs of the African rites were being performed in the African sunshine. The Pope was in Johannesburg, and it was Sunday, the 17th of September. A splendid dance introducing the Mass testified to the Pope's willingness to promote an African liturgy. A few hours before this service, the solemn, touching meeting between the Pope and Mandela had taken place at the airport of Johannesburg. Nelson Mandela and Karol Wojtyła shook hands at length amid the applause of the crowd. It was an encounter involving 2 men who symbolize our century, a meeting between 2 champions of freedom who had spent their lives fighting against 2 different forms of oppression and had finally won, and who now declared their gratitude for the support that each said he had received from the other. There was an air of familiarity between the 2, who were almost of the same age, the Pope being 75 and Mandela, the first black president of South Africa, 2 years older. Mandela, who had spent 27 years in prison, recalled that during that long dark period he had appreciated the support that came from Rome. He said, "Your message of hope, peace, justice and democracy reached us with all its force and was an inspiration for us in the search for liberty, unity and reconciliation." Now the Pope returned the compliment.
I wish to pay homage to you, Mr. President. After being a silent witness and participant in the yearning of your people for true freedom, you have now taken on the responsibility of challenging everyone to succeed in the task of national reconciliation and reconstruction.
On the 5th of October, John Paul again appeared before the United Nations General Assembly in New York, 16 years after his first visit. Seeing him come in limping with his hand trembling in the same place where he had once entered with the usual energy that he had had before the assassination attempt was somewhat startling. But still more startling was the contrast between the Pope's physical weakness and the verve of his optimistic outlook. The Pope addressed a message of faith to the world, pointing to a new frontier for the international community, that of the rights of peoples, who were urged to form a single great family. He said that this was a time of new hope, following the fall of communism and the collapse of most of the dictatorships of the Southern Hemisphere. He called for a Bill of Rights of Nations to be drawn up, setting out the right of every people to exist and defining the rules and the guarantees of their self-determination.
The Universal Declaration of the Rights of Man, adopted in 1948, dealt with the rights of individuals in an eloquent way. But there is not yet a similar international agreement that adequately deals with the rights of nations.
"1995 was also the year of the Evangelium Vitae, the Gospel of Life, and the Ut Unum Sint, because they are one and the same. The encyclical on life forcefully restated the long-standing teaching, "Thou shalt not kill," and specified that this commandment was also of binding application to the issues of new life and the lives of those facing death. For the first time, a pope took a stand against the death penalty. In the encyclical, John Paul praised as a sign of hope the ever greater aversion of public opinion to the death penalty, and then noted that within the Church too there was a growing trend to call for total abolition of this penalty. Finally, he stated that the death penalty could be considered legitimate only in case of absolute necessity, that is to say, when the defense of society would not otherwise be possible. But he immediately added that such cases were now extremely rare, or even practically non-existent. The encyclical on life was published on the 31st of March, and on the 31st of May, the ecumenical one followed it. The latter is a document that will have its place in the history of the papacy.
The conviction of the Catholic Church that it has preserved, in keeping with apostolic tradition and the faith of the Fathers, in the ministry of the Bishop of Rome, the visible sign and guarantor of unity, represents a difficulty for most other Christians whose memories are scarred by certain painful memories. To the extent that we are responsible, I ask, in common with my predecessor Paul VI, for forgiveness.
The request for forgiveness had already been made by Paul VI, but John Paul added a proposal that no pope had ever dared to make, inviting all Christian churches to conduct a search, together with the Catholic Church, for new historic ways of exercising the primacy of Peter that could be acceptable to everyone. 1994 was the International Year of Women, and on the 10th of July, John Paul addressed a letter to women in which he pointed out that everyone owes their existence to them. In that letter, the Pope gave a commitment on behalf of the Church to pay more attention to the talent of women, and asked for their forgiveness for the mistreatment that they had received from men of the Church throughout history. On another occasion, John Paul went so far as to state that the world and the Church should rewrite history to do justice to the contribution made by women.
Per un rinnovato apprezzamento della missione della donna nella società, sarebbe opportuno riscrivere la storia in modo meno unilaterale. Purtroppo una certa storiografia ha prestato attenzione più agli avvenimenti straordinari e clamorosi che non al ritmo feriale della vita, e la storia che ne risulta è quasi soltanto quella delle realizzazioni degli uomini. Occorre una inversione di tendenza. Quanto ancora deve essere detto e scritto circa il debito enorme dell'uomo verso la donna, in ogni settore del progresso sociale e culturale. Nell'intento di contribuire a colmare questa lacuna, vorrei farmi voce della Chiesa e rendere omaggio al molteplice, immenso, anche se spesso silenzioso, contributo delle donne in ogni ambito dell'umana esistenza.
This extremely intense 17th year of his term in office ended with the resumption of his health problems. And on Christmas Day he felt unwell during an address that was being broadcast live worldwide, causing alarm in more than 50 countries.
Benedicat vos omnipotens Deus, Pater et Filius et Spiritus Sanctus.
After about 10 minutes, the Pope returned to the window and spoke to the crowd and the world about the abdominal pain he had suffered. This dialogue was to intensify during the following months and years. The experience of pain taught him a way of communicating from a position of weakness that proved more effective than any other, in that no man or woman is unaware of pain.
Ecco. Grazie per la vostra pazienza. Vedete che anche il Papa ha le sue debolezze, però cerca di resistere. Vi ringrazio di cuore per la vostra pazienza. E vi auguro buon Natale, di tutto il cuore, buon Natale. Nel nome del Padre, del Figlio e dello Spirito Santo. Buon Natale.
呢一集嘅重點係寬恕同埋感恩。教宗為天主教徒所受嘅苦難，向迫害者表示寬恕。佢同樣為天主教徒所犯下嘅所有過錯請求饒恕。喺捷克同埋史洛伐克呢兩個國家，佢嘅寬恕同埋求恕行動都得到福音派嘅諒解，從而結束對抗，有利於合一運動。教宗明確表示，希望所有基督教會同埋天主教會一齊尋求一個合一嘅道路，而寬恕就係最重要嘅第一步。教宗同曼德拉嘅見面係最令人感動嘅一幕，兩位歷盡滄桑嘅老人互相致敬，令人相信良知公義仍然能夠戰勝一切，普渡眾生。